Hey, well, good morning and welcome to the final day of First Corinthians chapter 16. But don't worry, Second Corinthians is starting tomorrow. But First Corinthians chapter 16 is the last chapter of this letter from Paul, and he kind of begins to do some housekeeping, so to speak, and hammer out a couple details with them as he's closing this letter. And what's really important is to remember that this is a letter. All of what are known as the epistles, which is a letter written by an apostle, fancy words just to say people that walked with Jesus wrote letters to then encourage and challenge the church. So they would, write these letters and send it to the church in Rome, to the church in Ephesus, to the church in Corinth, all of these things. And as all of this was happening, they were visiting these places. This was kind of their version of networking in the first century. And so Paul had sent this letter to the church in Corinth. And so now that he is finishing this letter up, this is kind of the closing couple paragraphs as he is just finishing up some housekeeping. And so on verses 1 through 4, he begins to encourage them to begin collecting money, to begin receiving offerings to help the church in Jerusalem. Because, just for some context here, the church in Corinth was quite possibly one of the wealthiest churches during this time, and in Jerusalem was one of the poorest at this time and was struggling. And so what they were saying is, you in Corinth have so much abundance, as the scriptures would say. Out of your abundance, let's collect and begin to help those in need. And if you read, it says on the first day of the week, meaning the Lord's Day, or when they would go to the temple, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. Again, this is an example of tithing, right? In keeping with your income, a percentage of your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. That they'll just simply be able to, on a week-to-week basis, be able to be supporting the ministry happening in a different part of the world. So just simply, he's putting that in, and then at the last section, from 5 till the end of the chapter, he begins to just kind of write from his heart personally to them some practical stuff that was going on at the time. One of the things he calls out is Timothy, and this is really important setup for tomorrow and for the following epistles after this, is he begins to say, hey, I'm not going to be with you right at this exact moment, but I am sending Timothy to you. And Timothy comes onto the scene. Timothy is an absolutely awesome person. Paul writes 2 letters to him, 1st and 2nd Timothy, that are recorded later in the Bible, as well as some other sections of scripture are written towards him. He's a young guy, and God is using him in amazing ways. And Paul considers him his son. In other epistles, he talks about how he loves him as with the love of a father, as his son, his spiritual son. And so now he is sending Timothy to Corinth to help the church. And he says, okay, I'm sending him to you, though he may be young. He's full of the Spirit. He's full of God. And I need you guys to encourage him. I need you to be nice to him. Let there be anything that he should fear from you. And so he's doing all of this, encouraging them. Timothy's coming, Apollos is coming. They're going to come and encourage you. And he really begins to spread the net wide to the perspective of the church. When I say the church, I mean not Christian Life Center in Port Orchard, not even the church in Washington, not even the church, in the United States, the global church. He's thinking the church, and he begins to call out things from the church in general, and he even begins to call out a couple people that have just been serving the Lord greatly. And at the very end, he in chapter 19, or in verse 19, he begins to call out this couple, Aquila and Priscilla. They greet you warmly in the Lord, so does the church that meets in their house. So as he's writing to them, he begins to say, even the church where I'm at currently, where we're meeting at, Priscilla and Aquila, who are also called out in the book of Romans, he says, hey, they have a church that meets at their home, and they just want to say they love you, they care for you. And so they begin talking about the global church. So really, this whole last chapter is him saying basically 2 things. We need to be taking care of the church worldwide, nationally. We need to be taking collections, helping those that are in need, and those around us are also praying for you. And he's at the same time saying, be open to receive Timothy. Now, this is really setting up the stage for the second letter that Paul writes in 2 Corinthians. So make sure to be tuned in tomorrow as we start 2 Corinthians.